I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Victoria and pay respects to their elders, past and present. Hello and welcome to our panel for PAX. I am Liam Routt and I'm coming to you from Film Victoria, and this panel covers our funding for video games. In particular, we're going to find out how the Goose was made, pull back the curtain, and explore a little bit of what goes on behind the making of video games. So, video games have been being made in Victoria for as long as video games are being made around the world. For 25 years, the state government has been supporting the making of video games here. And in particular, Film Victoria has been directly involved in supporting this industry. I work for Film Victoria alongside Meredith Hall, and we are very lucky to be able to deal with an amazing group of developers year in, year out. The last several years, we've seen an explosion of talent here, and we've seen games hitting the global consciousness that have been made here in our very own city. We support a wide variety of developers here, from small individuals through to larger companies. And we do everything we can to support all aspects of the making of video games and their release. We often talk to developers years before their games are released to the public and get to help them through their journeys. So today we've got 3 developers. Maybe Meredith, you could tell us a bit about them.
So we have 3 Melbourne-based devs with us today in very different stages of the development process. We have Jake Strasser from House of, Goose game global success fame. We have Worm Club, led by Grace Bruxner.
Hello.
And which has created a dedicated audience around Frog Detective and Lobster Cop, depending on, which camp you land in. Fans, who's preparing to expand on that universe. And then Mike Blackney, head of Team Fanclub, working towards a much anticipated release for Dead Static Drive. So I'm very curious, and I'm happy for any of you to jump in here. How did you get started with your studio and your work?
So I started the studio because I needed to have a company in order to get funding from Film Victoria. Before I did apply for funding, I was just me working in my study at home. And I was teaching at a tertiary college, SAE here in Melbourne, and I was teaching programming and game design. And Dead Static Drive just started as a project on the side. It was something that I did at home. And I got a little bit of attention on Twitter, and I applied to show the game off at GDC one year. And Epic Games, who make Unreal, which we're using for Dead Static Drive, they were like, "Oh, we love it. This is great. How about we give you some money?" So they gave us a small amount of funding. And that gave the initial confidence to turn it into something real.
That's awesome. What about you, Grace? So how did you kind of get your studio start?
So I was making a bunch of smaller games throughout university, and then eventually decided I probably have to make a big one because that's the natural order of things in the games industry. So I started working on Frog Detective 1 while I was still at university with my partner Tom, and we released that after I'd graduated, and then it was amazing and everyone loved it in the whole world. So we were like, okay, I guess we have to make a second one, and we definitely did that. So we did that.
Well, it sounds like that was the right decision, being that everyone in the world loved it. I would have made the same choices. Jake, what about you and over at House?
Yeah, I think similar to Mike, we kind of started our company because we needed something else. We were making games together as friends, and we put out GIFs of our first game, Push Me, Pull You, online, and a Sony rep got in contact with us a few months in and just said, "Hey, we think this is really cool. What do you think about bringing it to PlayStation?" And we'd been making games for about 3 months at that point. And so didn't know anything and had no idea what the hell we were doing. And we kind of thought it might have been a scam. We had to Google his name and make sure that the email address was real and stuff. And we kind of realized that we needed to have a company in order to sell a game on PlayStation. And then we realized that I think maybe Shanglun Lee put us in contact, or sort of gave us an idea about what we should do. And we realized that we could apply for Film Victoria funding to help to form the company. So we got our first grant from Film Victoria, which was a marketing grant, and that helped to pay for a lawyer and accountant to do all the company stuff for us.
So you've all touched on it already, but what was that initial reason that you felt that you should or could reach out to get government funding? What was that sort of turning point in your head that said, it's okay if I go ask the government to help us get over the next little bit?
I think just seeing other developers doing it, and like, yeah, because I think the first grant that we went for was a marketing release fund one as well for Frog Detective 2, because we were sort of like pretty close to the end of development. And we'd released the first game without funding, without help. Basically, it was all just self-funded or we kind of did it in our spare time. Yeah, like we kind of wanted to experiment a little bit more with how we were. Like, I was pretty new to marketing in a traditional sense, so I wanted to just like make sure that I could do it in a safe way, like in a way that doesn't risk the company like exploding or whatever, like, because we were just we made a little bit of money on the first game, but not enough to like safely take risks, so we just wanted to see what would happen if we went for it.
What about you, Mike? Because yours was a different path. You didn't come to us for release funding, you came to us for development funding from the right from the get-go.
Yeah, right from the get-go. I didn't actually have confidence initially to come to Film Victoria. I thought that's for big games, people who have a studio, people who are taking themselves seriously. And so it took me a long time. And I was talking to a few other developers, and the Powerhoof devs told me that they applied for funding for Crawl. And I was like, yeah, but that's a great game. Like, I've played that. I can get that on Steam. Like, that's a real game, not like what I'm making. But then one of my ex-students, Dylan, he was making, I can't remember for the life of me what the name of the game is. Elden. It's a great game. And he applied for funding, I believe. And he was putting an application together. And I thought, hey, I taught him. Like, I should be able to apply for funding. And if someone says no, that's fine, right? Like, there's no love lost. There's no like problem if someone says no. But if I don't apply, I can't get it. And because I was working full-time teaching, I just thought, you know what, this game's never going to come out unless I make a step. I've got to talk to a publisher. I've got to talk to someone to get funding. So if I approach Film Victoria, then maybe that'll be enough to actually get to that point where I can turn it into a real project. Yeah. So I just took a leap. Got the confidence and took a leap, yeah.
So that's an interesting turning point in, I think to some extent, all of your projects, is that point where you've used government funding to allow you to get a partnership going with somebody around getting your game out there. So ultimately, Mike, you've ended up working with Microsoft. I know House got Panic on board, using our funding to help sort of push you in that direction. And Grace, you've been able to attract the attention of Superhot. How is it that funding unlocks those conversations? And what kind of transformation does that end up causing for your projects?
I'll go. So I think I just remember the first funding I got from Film Victoria wasn't like a game specific one. It was like a Women in Games micro grant. I'm not sure exactly what it was called, but it was like the kind of smaller version of the big Women in Games grant. And so I was using that to travel internationally, go to some events and meet people. And I think that kind of I'd had some conversations while I was in the US with some publishery people, and it was good to kind of have those conversations and sort of learn that it's possible. And I think I think we may have gotten the Superhot grant prior to the release grant for Frog Detective. I can't remember the timeline, but at least like I definitely like used that an initial grant to sort of like build up confidence and build up a network, and sort of like that's kind of how I felt comfortable enough to have those conversations when GDC came around. Oh, and we also got because we were nominated for IGF with Frog Detective 1, we had a travel grant to GDC that year, which like but basically the major conversations that we had with funds and investors and publishers and stuff were all at GDC. And I don't think that was something we could we couldn't super realistically afford to go without that. So it was great to have that.
Yeah, great. So I think our like early stories are pretty similar in that we also used our first grant from Film Victoria to basically travel and go to international events and meet people. Because we got a marketing release grant, we couldn't spend it on production. We had to spend it on doing other stuff. And we were all working second jobs, so production was in kind. We were just doing it in our spare time. But then, yeah, having this Film Victoria grant just allowed us to go, and we went to Fantastic Arcade and Indiecade and GDC, and we just started to get out there. And a really exciting thing I think about indie game dev especially is that there's a huge community around the world of people who are all very similar to you and all like the same stuff, and getting to go to these international events was all really exciting, and just built up that confidence and let us meet people, and you just sort of create these networks of friends and colleagues, and that's all really cool, and Film Victoria allowed us to do that. And I think just I don't know, it's felt like an extension of that to eventually work with a group like Panic. I think from the outside, people see these as, business deals, but we ended up working with Panic because they are people that we we want to spend time with, and we want to work with. They're very personal relationships, even though they're, financial ones as well. Because you end up having to spend a lot of time working with these people, so you want them to be your friends as well. And so, yeah, we, I don't know, it's just been a progression that Film Victoria allowed us to start going out and meeting people. And when we first announced the Goose game, Panic Cable, who runs Panic, sent us an email that night just saying, "Do you need a publisher?" That's how sort of silly and informal these relationships can be. And having money, we had a production grant at that point for Goose Game, which allowed us to work full time for the first time ever on video games. And so again, that just gave us particularly the freedom to take our time to decide who we wanted to work with, because we got a lot of offers from different groups. And I think if we didn't have the money from Film Victoria to give us that sort of just wiggle room, gave us the space to keep working and to make the right decision, and not just jump on the first offer that came along. We had a bit of leverage, and we had the ability to say, no, we're good. We could shop around, and eventually chose Panic because they were the best fit for us. And it's been a fantastic relationship. But I think, having the security of a grant that just sort of brought us up to this level, allowed us to continue making good decisions without financial stress.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like, and I think from knowing a little bit about each of your journeys, it gave you space to experiment and to take risks that you otherwise might not have had. And I know, I'd love to talk a little bit more about what getting funding from us allowed you to do that you might not otherwise have tried. And you've touched on some things like travel and stuff, but Grace, I know for you experimented a little bit with merchandise and different revenue streams and things like that. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so for our release grant, we suddenly had money, right? We suddenly had money from Film Vic, and we were like, okay, so how do we experiment with this a little bit. We knew that we were spending a portion of that grant to go to PAX West, and like it's kind of just a thing that you do at PAX West, right, is sell merchandise. And I've kind of been interested in that side of the production process for a while. So I started talking to like a plushie manufacturing company. It was kind of hard to like, I talked to you, Meredith, quite a bit about it, trying to find one that was like not too expensive, but also like not like the labor practices weren't terrible. Like it was pretty important to me to find one that like was using ethical labor and like, you know, basically like the best we could find without breaking the bank too much. So we found a company called, like I knew about this like company called like Budsies, where they make like custom plushes for like kids, the characters. They have like a wholesale section there, and I was like trying to do research and like figure out what kind of production sort of style they had. So I reached out to them, and like it was I think $250 to start that production process, so start that sample process. And they sent me a photo of the sample, and it was like a version of the Frog Detective, but the eyes were really long, like an alien, like little stalks, and like
special edition.
and the mouth was just flat, and also the shirt was like skin tone, like skin color, flesh. It was just I wasn't totally on board with that one. I was quite concerned that maybe I'd spent $250 on something that wasn't going to work out. So I like drew over it and sent it back. I was like, please fix it. They sent another version, and it was like a lot closer to this final one. But the mouth was still just like sad neutral mouth. And eventually we got it to this point, which was like so exciting. Like it was a bit of a stressful process because we had to get it done, and like they had to make like, I don't know how many hundred, a few hundred they made by the time we got to PAX, because that's where we were selling them. And like I kind of was like, okay, so not everyone can go to PAX West, and we have a sizable fan base now. Like how do we distribute this in a way that's fair and doesn't just like focus too much on people that can afford to go to PAX West? So I set up an online store to do like a pre-sale, because I'd also hired a couple of like really interesting artists to do t-shirt designs. I hired Lolita Chung, Jennifer Zhao, and Geov Chatao. I'm probably messing up all three of their names, but they're all really talented artists. We got them to do some t-shirt designs, and we did a limited run of all of those. Again, using like t-shirts, we used AS Color, the brand AS Color, which are like sort of like ethically made t-shirts. And then we got all those. It was a whole disaster to try and get them there for PAX West, but I did the pre-sale before PAX West, and we sold out of everything in an hour, which was like wild. And I also accidentally put too many plushies on the store. So I sold like almost all of our plushies online. I only had like 30 for PAX, and so like we're getting like people coming at like 8 a.m. to try and get the like limited amount of plushies that we had per day. It was a whole thing. I'd made these plushies, they'd done well, t-shirts had sold out, PAX went super great, and then at PAX we were getting approached by the Yeti and Fangamer. Both of them were coming up to the booth fighting it out. The Yeti kept bringing me little presents every day, and like Fangamer would come up and like buy a new t-shirt every day. It was really sweet. And eventually we ended up reaching out to Fangamer to like talk to them, because we'd spent hours and hours, days like trying to ship out all these items on our own, which was like really stressful, especially in a foreign country, and we both had the flu. So it was a mess. But we reached out to Fangamer and we said, can you do this for us? Like, we're exhausted, because there's a demand, and like we like their stuff. It was high quality. And it also meant like, because we had gone through that process, now we have someone doing the work for us, but we're still getting revenue from it. Not a huge amount, but like a decent amount for not essentially doing no work currently. which has been like, it was just super interesting, and like something that feels like such a high risk thing to do. And like I wouldn't have done it. I mean, I would have done it in a much smaller scale unless I had the funding. So it was good. Highly recommend.
And what about you, Mike? Was there anything that you talked a little bit about traveling and having these conversations, but is there anything that you feel like you wouldn't have taken these kind of risks without that funding behind you to back you?
Yeah. One of the best things that I've done while making the game is gone over to GDC. I mean, gone to the US a bunch to demo for conventions, but also I've taken some research trips, which I would not have had the extra time and funding for. And since I'm making a game that's set in the US, being more familiar with a lot of the rural areas is like super useful. So I took a trip after GDC one year. I drove all the way up to Oregon, and then I flew from there to Washington. I went from there to Utah, I think. Yeah, and I went to Palm Springs in California. I've traveled to a bunch of different states there now, and doing the research and understanding how varied the places are, and just picking up on the language, picking up on people's eccentricities, getting ideas for things that I would not have thought of otherwise. Like, that's been so useful. I mean, plus it's fun. I mean, it's fun as hell to go on a road trip somewhere in the US and just like see where it takes you. But it was such great research. And I would never have thought of doing that if I didn't have that extra buffer. And I think, Jake, you were saying it before about having the buffer. That means you don't have to take the first thing that's offered to you. And thinking back on it, the first offer that we had, and this is before I had any Unreal funding, I didn't have any FilmVic funding. Like, this is right at the start of the project. I got an offer from a publisher who said they would want to give me 40% revenue or something like that. And I was like, wow, I can make a game with that, right? I can totally do that. And I'm glad I didn't. I'm really glad I didn't. I took it home and I thought about it. And then that was 2 days before I got Unreal funding. And I was like, oh, okay, hold on. I'm going to think about this. And now I know that's a terrible deal. So anyone watching this, that's an awful deal and you shouldn't take that. But,
PSA.
Yeah, PSA, do not. But so I didn't take the first deal. I didn't end up taking any publisher deal. We don't have a publisher, thankfully, because we don't need one at the moment for funding. And so if we do end up releasing with a publisher, that'll be a different thing, but it'll be unconstrained from like money, which puts us in a really strong, powerful position.
I also feel like in a sense, like going through the process of applying to FilmVic, it does two things. It spoils you because like the process of applying to FilmVic versus like a publisher or a investor is so nice because like you get to keep all the money. Like you don't have to like consider whether it's a good deal or not, because obviously it's a good deal. But it's also like it gives you that kind of understanding of like what a budget is, what a pitch is, like, and like it's also doing that in a kind of safer environment than it would be with like going to a publisher, because you kind of have to do it right if you're going to a publisher or an investor. But if you go to FilmVic, it's like they will talk you through it. Like the help is there. I think that was really good, like kind of early into my career, like learning how to just like put something like that together. And I think that's kind of like a rare thing that doesn't like isn't super accessible for people that are outside of Victoria. That's just the little tangent.
No, it's nice to know.
We'll visit Camille.
So I guess as well, people really like to focus on the success of a release title that does well. And, this amazing thing that happens when, you get all this success, and surely that must solve all your problems with game development and deciding what you do next. But I would love to know, how does that success change your journey going forward with future titles? And maybe this is one where we'll start with you, Jake. Now that you've made Untitled Goose Game, it's done really well. What does that change in terms of thinking about your audience and thinking about development as you move forward now as a team?
I think ideally, very little beyond, an absolute, just again, that sort of kind of security. Like we have a whole heap more wiggle room now, a whole heap more space to try things and sort of experiment and like, talk about not having to take, the first thing that comes up. Like I can't really say what we're going to do next. Like, we're still not really 100% sure. But like, I think we're very excited to keep making games, and we're very excited to make something new. We've just about had enough of the Goose, I think. But I don't know, we're in an incredibly enviable position, I think, that we can keep doing what we want as we want. I don't know, in terms of how it changes things, I don't know, like, I don't think we're... I don't know, maybe I shouldn't say it to an audience of potential fans, but I don't think we feel too beholden to fans. I think we make our games for ourselves, and people seem to like them, and so we're going to continue doing that as much as possible. I think once we get into whatever the next game is, I think that'll probably start getting a bit harder. I think we do have a sense of expectation as much as we can try and remove ourselves from it. So it'll be really interesting and weird to start to rub up against that. I think just like, if we announce whatever the next thing is, people are going to have opinions about it. And then those opinions are going to be probably a pretty different experience to how they thought about Goose. Like, for good or bad, I don't know, that's going to be interesting once it sort of, becomes real for us and for everyone. But we're still in sort of an in-between period, so I don't know if I have a solid answer.
But it seems like, and I'd be interested to hear from you, Grace, as well, being off the back of, the release of Frog Detective 2, it's almost like that risk buffer allows you to then take the risk that gets you to the next step, to then take the next risk that looks different, and kind of is this sort of stepping process. Would you agree with that? Do you think that taking that initial risk lets you then slowly sort of level up, I guess, to be really lame and use a specific video game term?
Oh, level up. Sorry. Like, I think we were we kind of went into the development process knowing that the first game was going to be an experiment, and like, if it didn't work out, that was fine. But we basically like did small scope, low risk, something that was like achievable and we liked and didn't have crunch and like was very sustainable. And then once that did like well enough that we could take it to a investor or whatever and be like, hey, look, like we recouped. Like, we recouped our investment, which was technically $0. So like, I'm not lying. But we kind of had like an estimated amount of like what our label was worth, and we had recouped that within 6 months. So that was like a good sort of like starting point of like, we know this game can be successful, and like the more that we make, the like it just like will make more money for the first game, make more money, like it just gets up. And I feel like with like future stuff, like I don't know, like we took risks with the second game, which really paid off for the first one. Like it always just goes down. And like, I'm kind of in this like in between zone now where I just like, I don't know what risks to take necessarily, but at least like I have that freedom to take those risks if I want to. Like I have some pretty wacky, weird ideas, which I think are quite funny.
More to come.
And it just,
yeah,
I think that I maybe take for granted as well. And I think a lot of people take for granted, just in hindsight, Goose Game seems like this inevitability, but like at the time when we started making it, we thought that it would be a thing that no one really cared about, and that like we thought it was just going to be a weird experiment, really. And we didn't expect to take publisher money. We thought we would get, our sort of plan was maybe let's try and get a Film Victoria grant, and worst case, that'll pay for like this one level that we can release, and then we can move on to our next real serious project that people will care about. And so like just even having that space from Film Victoria allowed us, like Goose Game felt like a risk at the time. Like it felt like this weird, dumb decision. And I think like, I don't know, that's a very special thing to be in. I think there's a reason that lots of cool stuff comes out of Victoria. because Film Victoria is here letting people take these kinds of risks.
Mm.
I can remember you came in to our interview when we were interviewing you, and we said everyone in the panel loved it. And I can't remember whether it was you or one of the other, you said, really? Like, you actually weren't sure. Whereas all of us were completely convinced, like, this is going to go somewhere, it's going to do something. We didn't see global success for it necessarily, but I think maybe that's a thing that is worth acknowledging, that coming in with your piece of art and putting it out in front of someone is a difficult thing to do, and doing it in a slightly more controlled situation probably gives a lot of advantage to you to relax and do your best work.
Absolutely, yeah. I think any kind of creation is a risk in a way. Like,
I still remember like seeing just hearing rumors. Like rumors, there's a Goose game. They're making something with a goose, and like going from that to like seeing it at RSK and like Nico being really nervous to show it off and stuff, and then like suddenly it's Mario.
I remember the first time I met you, Mike, and you were an independent developer, and you were working on this thing that had these really cool visuals, and then turning around, like a year and a half later, and you're not just an independent developer, you're the creator of something that people are hanging on. You've made quite a transformation during that. How did that feel? How did that sort of shift occur?
Amazing. I think that if any of that's changed, it's not actually changed for me inside. For me, I'm still an independent developer. It's just now I've got friends. So now I have other people who are helping me, and they're just as independent as me, and we're all working together on a team, and it's wonderful. But I don't know. I don't really like. I know a lot of people look at what we're making, and when I'm on Twitter, that's important to me. And when I'm on the internet, when I'm jumping on and trying to get some attention for the game for 5 minutes, I'm like, okay, well, how do I say something in a way that will get a spark out of people? Make them say, I like this. This looks good, But then I have to go away from it and just forget about it, because, you got to get the game made, and you got to not think about that stuff. You just don't, I don't want, it's really weird. There's the potential, I think, particularly early on developing the game, there's this potential for this weird feedback loop, because you share something, people give you feedback on it. And then if they don't respond well to something, you might think, oh, well, maybe that's not a good idea or whatever. But as a developer, I think, and as someone who's creating some piece of art that means something to you, you need to have that confidence of, well, my vision is important to me, and I think that I'm doing the right thing. So, yeah, I'm just the same, Mike, I guess. That's what I'm saying.
So a lot of developers tell us that it's quite scary to approach us for funding. Do any of you have any comments around that aspect?
Yes. When I was going for the Women in Games grant, I had just started on a new medication, and it made me really weird. And I had to have a meeting with Liam for the first time. And I was like at this meeting at this coffee shop, and I don't drink coffee. And I asked the coffee person for a menu, and he said, what? I was like, do you have a menu? And they were like, no. I was like, why don't you have a menu? And I was like really concerned. And then I got a hot chocolate and I was talking to Liam, and I was really nervous because I wanted to prove that I deserved it. So I was like, I try really hard. I really would like some money. I would do so many things. And I was like, just like on this new medication, it's like out of my mind. Sorry, Liam. Anyway, that's my answer. I think about it all the time. This barista that like wouldn't give me a menu. I don't know how to order a coffee. Like, I don't know what types of coffee there are. I just wanted to know. He made fun of me.
No, you had the right call, because Liam doesn't really drink coffee either. So he would have been right there with you on the hot chocolate train.
What about the others of you? Is it scary? Is it intimidating?
Are we scary?
Yeah, it was scary. It was very scary for me. It felt like real adult grown-up stuff. And like, I am an adult and I do grown-up stuff all the time, but doing grown-up stuff in a field that is like teaching or some other career. I've had a few different jobs, and every time that I needed to be a serious adult in another job outside of games, I was like, easy, I can do that. It's fine. All I have to do is just do the thing. I know how people do adult things. And for some reason, being in games, it's like this huge intimidating thing because I want it to be successful. I'm personally committed to it. And if it doesn't work, I'll be devastated. So like for some reason that built up inside as like oh mate, do you really want to try that? Because how bad would you feel if it doesn't go well? But yeah, you just got to turn up.
You were a teacher at the time.
I was a teacher. Yeah, I was a teacher for 5 years.
You were already doing that.
Sorry?
You were already doing that.
Yeah. Turning up in front of a bunch of 19, 20-year-olds who don't respect you. That was actually a pretty good training ground for being able to go up and approach people who might just reject you. That's fine.
I think as well, like once we'd finished, I mean, like after I'd had that first initial meeting, that it went fine. It was nothing to do with Liam. It was just I was having a time. But like when we actually went to like talk about Frog Detective and like other funding stuff, it was like a really easy process because it's not like we're not going there to prove that we deserve like whatever. We're just asking questions, trying to figure out like what's the best approach, and like you both are there to help. Like you're not there to intimidate us or make us feel like we can't get the funding. Like I think it's in both of your best interests that you're giving everyone as like much support as they can, which is like super obvious when you go to those meetings.
Yeah, I think the meeting, there's always been like the two sides, the sort of the friendly, like come in for a meeting, come in for a chat for Victoria, and then there's the actually go in for the grant proposal, like meet the panel of experts and stuff. And doing that for the first time was really terrifying. And yeah, I guess in that way that it just felt so real and like felt so high stakes. But that we've done that 3 or 4 times now, I think, and it in a way is sort of it's a really good training, I think. Like even just filling out the forms for the grant application, like it asks you to sort of write about your game and look at things in a way that you wouldn't normally be pressed to. And I think it's just, even if you didn't even submit, just going through those forms is really useful because it just like pushes you to write a one-line synopsis of the game, a short one. It's like a single paragraph. It asks you to think about budget and like plan in these ways and sort of make things that can be quite like, messy and unspoken kind of concrete. And doing that stuff for the first time was so hard, but has gotten easier and easier the more we practice it. And I think it's just a really good skill to try and get better at too. And now going in doesn't feel quite so scary, and you feel way more confident talking to these people. And like, I think, yep.
Well, that's a perfect segue for my next question, which is, there's obviously a lot of challenges with these processes, whether it's talking to us for funding or talking to publishers as you kind of go along this game development journey. When you think about, those earlier endeavors where it sounds like a lot of the time it's the business side of things that's really hard to grapple with for the first time, have the challenges changed for you? Do you find that, they're changing just in terms of scale, in that you're dealing with more people or, maybe more offers or whatever that looks like? Or is it more that your challenges are changing in terms of what you're creating because you've been given this space and this scope with the funding that you've gotten either from us or from other publishers? How have those challenges kind of morphed and shifted for all of you over time?
I think I would look at it as a shift in scale in all respects. I think just from starting out 7 years ago or whatever it was, we didn't know anything, and we were this little nub of knowledge and just sort of poked at the edges until it grew a bit more, and then we found new edges to kind of poke at. And we sort of, went down the paths that were easier, and our knowledge grew and our experience grew. I think, like, for me at least, that's just felt like that process has continued all the way through to now. Like, there's still heaps I don't know. I'm trying to learn to program at the moment, and it's really hard, and I don't really know what I'm doing. Like, I feel like, just my short career so far in game development has been just this process of kind of discovering and working out what needs to happen next. And those things have gotten bigger and bigger, and sort of maybe more extreme or more important, or like the things that we're worrying about are maybe like, or maybe it's more just that the things that were really hard before are now easy, and now we have new things that are really hard, and they're probably more interesting and more challenging in some ways, but it still feels the same. We're just at this new level, still just pushing at the edges.
Would you agree with that, Mike? I see you nodding.
Yeah. I mean, mine's a little bit different because I didn't start off with a team of friends. I started off solo, so I had a slightly different arc. And at the moment, I'm working with some incredible friends, but it felt like it was a really weird experience. The first film Vic grant that I got, I started working with a few artists and a musician, and that was wonderful, and it was a new place for me. But suddenly I needed to, because I've worked on games before, but I've never been in charge, like a creative lead of a project, and giving people direction and asking them for what you want and being able to communicate that to them is never a thing that I've needed to do. I didn't have like documentation, which is terrible because I've got 5 years of teaching and telling students that they need to document everything. But, it was a project that I was doing at home, so I'm not going to spend time documenting. I'm just like, blah, 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 blah. So moving from that to working with a few artists and then getting actual funding and making a studio, and we were in the arcade for a while, and now we're remote. But yeah, it's that transition and learning how to be a boss and learning how to be a creative director, like someone who actually tells people not just what to do, but why they're doing it. And so they can be trusted to make the right decisions at home. And you're not around each other all the time. We're all working remotely. So how do you communicate to someone who can't just tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, Mike, so should I do this or should I do this? That has been a huge set of challenges for me. Wonderful. Definitely. It's improved me as a person, I think. And the next title will be very different from this one in production style. But yeah, that was a huge deal.
I feel like for me, like the beginning challenge was like, okay, I know how to make games. I know what I like. I feel comfortable creating something, but there was like this whole world of like business and like marketing and all this stuff that I just like was interesting to me, but kind of it was like almost a dirty word to like market your game or like do biz dev. Like people are like, oh, biz dev, like, but like for me, it's a means to be more creative. Like if you market your work and people play it, then you give yourself more freedom to actually make something again. Because you can make a bunch of stuff, but to sustain yourself doing it, you need to know this stuff. You need to know business development. You need to know marketing, like PR. Like you need to know how to talk to press. And like for me, I started working at a fund, like a investment company called Wings, like a year and a half ago. Just like basically every fortnight. Reviewing pitches for games and like learning, like I learnt so much in a very short amount of time because I was reviewing pitches basically every week, reviewing budgets and kind of figuring out why pitches and why budgets get rejected or why they get approved. And like just like for me, like I was working in that space before I'd actually started pitching myself, so it made it like a lot easier for me so I can look at the pitches that are good, I can look at the pitches that are bad and try to like make a pitch that works. And like when we were pitching to companies, like we like almost every developer, every publisher that we talked to approved our pitch and like wanted to fund it, which I kind of like thought was normal. And I feel like it gave me like a perspective. Sorry, my doggy shit's here. It gave me like a perspective when I realized that I was like rejecting more than like 90% of the applications that I got, that like maybe there was something a bit special about our game, and like trying to figure out exactly what that was, and like what works, and you know, whether it's the scope or the like content or whatever. And I feel like, you know, I've been, you know, working in that sort of space for a long time now, or like a reasonably long time compared to the amount of time I've been in the industry, but like about 1.5 years or 2 years of business development and marketing and that kind of work. And now it's sort of gotten to the point where, you know, there's a pandemic, and like that work is so easy for me. Like it makes sense to me. It's straightforward. I can like, you know, I can do all that with my eyes closed. But now I'm like struggling to actually do creative work, because like I just can't do creative work. And it's sort of my biggest challenge at the moment is to like force my brain back into a creative way of thinking rather than like a business way of thinking. And I feel like that's sort of like where the struggle is. You can sort of do one or the other. Like it's hard to do both at once. You have to either be creative or be logical, and I like struggle doing both.
We've talked a lot about the effects of funding. What are the other advantages to working in Melbourne and in the community that we have here in Melbourne?
I think I sort of touched on it before a little bit, but just that I think really truly believe that because FilmVic is here funding games, like it just lets people like, it means there are more people around who are making games with a bit of money and with a bit of freedom to take risks and do interesting things, and to be in a community of people who like are making interesting stuff is really, really valuable. Like it means that there's a whole bunch of people that you can collaborate with. It means that there's a whole bunch of people you can get ideas from, talk to. Just on Sundays, we play video games with some game friends, and like some friends from the UK and some friends from Melbourne. Like it creates this sort of ecosystem and like just good vibe environment to make some video games in.
Yeah, and I feel like the fact that we've got FilmVic and the fact that we've got an art city as well, like there's not just Film Victoria. Film Victoria is absolutely integral, but we also have other smaller groups like Creative Victoria who help with PAX funding, and there's small arts grants that you can get. You can go to the Boyd building has arts residencies, different places in Melbourne. You can go and just say, hey, listen, I want to make art. I want to go to Acme and get a work desk. There's a community of art. So it feels like we've got enough people who are generating a feeling of you can keep doing it here and you can be successful here, that people aren't fleeing, which means that we've got a lot of really talented people here, which is fantastic. So if I need to talk to a publisher, or if I need to talk to, you know, I want to get in touch with someone at Microsoft and say, hey, listen, you know, let's talk. I can probably find 5-6 people who can give me an email address, which in small cities, you know, if I was growing up in, let's say Darwin.
Hey.
No, I love it. It's great. It's slightly smaller than Melbourne.
Just a little bit. Yeah.
It would probably be quite a bit harder to find someone and tap them on the shoulder and say, hey, listen, can I get an email from someone at Microsoft?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think like Grace, as someone, because I grew up in Melbourne, and so I take everything for granted, I think too. And I think there's like, I don't know, there's that thing of like, when you grow up somewhere a bit crummier, not to say Darwin, no comment, just somewhere that isn't Melbourne, like it's so much more exciting to leave the place you grew up in to go off somewhere really big and exciting. And there's a part of me that like doesn't have that urge, because like I really feel like, what am I going to find that isn't Melbourne? Like I've been to a lot of different cities around the world, and it rules.
Yeah, Melbourne's great. Like I mean, I grew up in Darwin, in case that wasn't obvious. And like there was nothing to do with games in Darwin. Like, yeah, it was a barren wasteland.
So Darwin,
sorry, my
side.
Anyway, yeah.
I guess
but I was going to say, like, for me, it was, you kind of had to really like games and be willing to risk a lot to do games, because I came to Melbourne to study at RMIT and study games, and like I feel like the reason that I've kind of gotten to where I am is because I didn't really have a safety net. Like I couldn't just go home if things didn't work out, if I couldn't make money. Like I couldn't just like go pack up my bags and go back to Darwin. Like it wasn't an option. So I had to just like really kind of force myself to make connections, make friends, like learn everything that I could. And I came into the like RMIT course with zero skills. Like I just didn't know anything. But I had that drive, I think. And like, I feel like I I've moved to Melbourne now. I've been here for 4 years. I don't know how long. But it's sort of a place where I don't think I could develop games anywhere else, realistically.
Awesome. So I guess to close us out, let's say you had a direct line to an aspiring developer right now. They're sitting and listening to all of this and thinking, oh my God, that's amazing. If you could tell them one thing, whether that's about, talking to us or if they're thinking about funding, what's the one thing you'd want them to know or want them to hear? I'll give you a second to consider your wisdom, your pearls of wisdom.
Talk to FilmVic, go and have an initial meeting. It'll make things easier for you. And my other little bit of advice, which is maybe a bit controversial, but you'll see the like maximum amount of funding that you can get for a project. You don't have to make that your budget. You don't have to go right to the top. Like, yep, that's my advice. Don't necessarily like scope your game so that you get, I'm going to get all the 50,000. I don't know how much the max is for FilmVic, but I'm going to get $300,000 for my game. I'm going to make it big. That's my advice.
I think, yeah, in that spirit of scope and thinking about like making those kinds of plans, like I think a huge strength of House and the way that we work is that we're really quite conservative in all those decisions. Like we're really, really careful in making those next steps. Like we try and keep everything kind of manageable so that when something big and exciting comes along, we're well set up, we're secure enough that we can kind of take those kind of opportunities. I think like, when people like jump into scopes that they just can't, like they bite off more than they can chew, or they take on debt, or they take on these other things, like keep your sort of sights small, and lots of small steps lead somewhere big. Like just keep chipping away at stuff, and I think things work that way a lot more comfortably than like really just jumping in and realizing that you're in over your head.
Yeah, I'd say see if you can find a really short-term mentor. And it doesn't have to be a mentor like, hey, listen, can you mentor me for 6 months or whatever? It can be an afternoon. Hey, listen, can you just not even have a Skype talk with me? Can you just send me a couple of messages to just kind of let me know what it's like to apply for a grant, or what I don't really understand what my options are. Just approach someone who you think might be approachable. I tend to get back to people on DMs if they send them to me on Twitter. And if you say, hey, listen, can I have a half-hour conversation? I'll say, no, sorry. Yes, goodbye, block. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people who I learned from. I approach other Melbourne devs and I say, hey, listen, what do I do with tax? Like, how does that work? And they said, oh, okay, listen, here's the basics, but okay, it's all really complicated. So I'll write down a couple of notes and then come and ask me later if you want. Or about, there's so much on the business side, and it's so complicated. It feels a bit intimidating sometimes, but if you have someone who can sit down and explain it to you, or who can explain to you how FilmVic grants work, what the different categories are, what the process is, what the chances are, that kind of thing, then it means that, if you do end up approaching Film Victoria, which everyone I think should, if they've got something that they're making that's a great piece of art, then it means that whatever it is that they learn from the Film Victoria meetings, isn't the only information that they've got, and they kind of have a bigger picture and it's less scary.
Amazing. Well, look, thank you so much for joining us, the three of you today. I know we're very proud of all you've achieved and all you will continue to achieve. In terms of everyone who might be watching this, our guidelines are on our website. It's film.vic.gov.au, but if you Google Film Vic Games Funding, you will find the page that you need to. But look, if you're based in Victoria, if you're thinking about funding, even if it seems like a lifetime away or you feel like you're not an adult, like poor Mike did for some time, please reach out to us, send us an email. We love to talk to you. It's the best part of our job, so please don't hesitate. But otherwise, enjoy PAX Online, and take care of each other. Bye.
And thank you so much, the three of you, for talking to us today.
Pleasure, thanks.